Hello and welcome to lesson 4 or week 4, and we're going to go over chapter 2 in your research proposal. Now remember, we had some homework, your assignments. Remember, your problem statement and your research goals should not be what are called dichotomous statements. And that may be something that's slightly unfamiliar to you, but a dichotomous statement or a dichotomous variable is one that has just, it's either on or off. It's black or white. It is or it isn't. And, so you want to make sure that your goals are not very narrowly focused. You don't want to say, I'm just going to do this or that. Also, remember, your research questions and objectives have to have an active verb. You don't want to have a passive statement, and you have to work really hard to write in past tense. I told you that's probably one of the hardest things to remember, is that you're writing it as if it's already been an accomplished fact. So we're going to talk today about Chapter 2, which is the review of literature. And why do we care what the review of literature says? Well, it gives us a lot of background information. For one, we kind of know what other people have done before us. It helps us identify who might actually be the authority on that subject, which gives us what we call power citations. It helps us also become an expert in the area that we are very interested in. So if you were interested in career academies and how they should be conducted, if you read enough literature about it, you would become a quasi-expert about it because you've done a lot of research and you understand. And then you also do a review of literature to summarize existing scholarship or existing studies that have already been published. And it helps add to the validity of why you're doing the study that you are doing, since others have done it. Your review of literature, though, is supposed to be a critical type of assessment of the literature. It's not just to read it. You read it and analyze it. So you have to make sure that you really have quality research articles. And some assumptions that you make as the researcher are that, all these articles have flaws and they only offer degrees of evidence, but they're not, stone cold factual truth. They are things that you may be able to prove or disprove with your research. And you also have to make the assumption that there are going to be weaknesses in the sampling because it may limit generalizations. Depending upon the sample that they used for their research, it may not be generalizable to the study that you are undertaking. And there's also a difference in how you measure and account for the variables in your research methodology, and that can lead to different outcomes. So you want to be very aware of what's gone on before you, but you also want to have a critical eye to it. So a review of literature really just sheds more light on the variables that you are researching and gives you more information that you need. And it should also, though, tell both sides of what is known. You have to tell both sides of the story, the things that support your thesis or your hypothesis, and things that may contradict it. So here's an example. If you had conflicting results regarding STEM careers and women of color, Jones may say that this is a very minor finding. However, Smith might have stated in their research that it was a different type of finding. So you need to have both sides. I like the way Jones says 2105. That's really some future-looking research right there. Your review of literature should be a synthesis. It's a putting together. It's a whole picture of what is known and what you can determine is not known at this time. It's an attempt for you to show, that all these diverse pieces where people have done different research projects, how they all kind of come together and the information taken as a whole fits together for your research topic. So here's a little bit of a diagram to show you. You have your problem and your goals, and your introduction, why, go through your literature. And this is always an important thing. Remember how the problem arose. So why do we review literature again? So we can identify some ways that people did their research, maybe a methodology they used or a particular survey or instrument that they used was very successful and you could use that for your research. It also helps you find out that if there's not much information out there or people have tried to find a correlation between two facts and it turns out that there wasn't, then you won't go down the road and spend all your time working on a dead-end topic. It also helps you get ideas on how to structure your own writing by reading what other people have done. So what do we use the literature review for? So we can discover important variables that go along with our problem. We can tell what's been done from what needs to be done. We know what people have done in the past and we have ideas of things to do now, and it helps us to synthesize and gain perspective on our topic. So chapter 2 topics are guided by your goals. What you're going to research in your literature is guided by what you're trying to do in your research. Chapter 3 is guided by your goals. Chapter 4 is guided by your goals. And chapter 5 will answer whether you achieved your goals or what your goals told you. So you can see that your research goals are key to the entire product. So how do we review literature? There's lots of ways. The way we organize our review, we can do it as in concepts using variables or describers in the problem statement, or we can use variables or describers identified in the research goals, our hypotheses. Remember, that's for experimental types of research, or our objectives or question, which are for historical or descriptive research. Sometimes methodologies or instruments are also reviewed in this chapter, but not as extensively as in chapter 3. So what if you find too many things that relate to your topic, or you feel like it relates to your topic? First thing is that you want to make sure the research that you bring up is current. There are occasional times where research that took place maybe 40, 50 years ago is still relevant to a certain aspect. But as a general rule, you want to try to make sure that the research that you're citing is within at least the last 10 years. And if you're dealing with a technology type subject, you might even want to narrow that down a little bit. When you're reading another piece of literature, does the title or the subtitle really show that it's going to be relevant to the actual research problem you were looking for? And then you can always flip to the back, because that is a valuable place to find more resources. Does it show that this person used primary sources, critical resources, ones that are considered by our field of study as being very valuable and valid resource documents? So, on the other hand, what happens if you do it and you find hardly any documentation about your research problem? What do? Well, you look at the little bit you do see and you say, I wonder if it was researched in another field. Maybe it has something, that you can correlate, as they say here, soldiers to policemen. But definitely go to the back of their papers and use their reference list to see if you can cull out more information. Sometimes if you have too few sources to go to, see if your topic can go to another discipline, maybe to another science, maybe natural, physical, or social, to talk about how this correlates with another area of studies. So this one says benefits of extracurricular activities, which have to do with the physical exercise type of science, versus benefits of going to CTSOs, which are career technical student organizations, just in case you didn't know that. If there's too few sources, again, you can actually contact some of the scholars in the field to help you define or redefine or project some other ideas that might be related to your project. So let's start our literature review. The first thing we do is we choose our interest areas by looking at your research variables. What are the things you're trying to find out? If you want to know about course decisions for Gen Z students, some of the things that you would want to check is how Gen Z students do, how they are in school, how do they pick courses, things like that. You search for relevant titles in databases and look at and read through abstracts. That way you don't have to read the whole 50 pages to find out it doesn't support what you want. And you just keep looking until you find materials that support what you need. You have to remember that sometimes there's thousands of titles out there, and you can't deal with all the titles, so you have to try to find these ways to winnow down or narrow what you're really looking at. So use the table of contents, the indexes or the abstracts, and journals. Because of their currency and their widespread use, they are usually one of the best sources, especially for our area of study. You know, when you get an article and you read it, making sure that you have that reference citation is extremely important. The notes here say copy or print the complete reference citation and save the article. And we'll talk about that at the end of this presentation today, a couple of tips and tricks to do that. Make sure that you keep some kind of system, whether you use EndNote, whether you use the built-in database in Microsoft Word, or if you make your own little running spreadsheet or running title of what you have so that you know what resources are the most relevant for you. So what are some of the things that we all do when we're trying to review the literature? We try to rush through it. Sometimes we don't go to the primary source. We might review a document that is written based on somebody else's research. Sometimes we don't look at the methods and the instruments they used. We just look to see what they found out. And maybe what they found out, if you go back and look at their methodology, their research ways, and the instruments they use, they may not really correlate with what you're trying to do. Sometimes we get so caught up, we only look at educational journals, but there are other things. You know, there are books. And like I said, later on, we'll talk about some of the databases at ODU. It's always been my problem. There's way more research than I have time to ever look at. Or sometimes your topic is too broad or your search is too broad and you end up with returns on your search that really don't relate to your topic, and you waste time reading through them and trying to see if they're really important. Sometimes you don't copy the data, the citation, or sometimes you just forget it and you lose it. And sometimes you can't go back and find the information when you need it. Sometimes you have too much information and you can't make heads or tails out of what you have. So like I said, it's very much a winnowing process. You have to be very careful and very selective in what you keep and what you don't keep. So what are some major sources of getting our information? Like I said, we use journals a lot, but books are very relevant. ERIC is an excellent place. There's also another one called EBSCO, which is, these are databases, and you can go and look up things and put some qualifiers on them so that your search isn't so wild. You can read abstracts, and you can go to indexes and see what they list. So there's also things called reviews, like the Encyclopedia of Education or the Encyclopedia of Educational Research, that has already reviewed articles and gives a short summation of what these articles contain so that you can read through that before you go to the article itself. Newspapers, depending upon your topic, can have relevant information that you want to report. Government documents, court proceedings, case proceedings, anything that the government publishes or puts out. Web documents are also very important. They also have to be taken with a grain of salt. You need to make sure that they are from a reliable and valid source. Just because it's on the internet, we all know it's not necessarily true. And sometimes something can look very authoritative, but it really isn't. So while these other things are valuable, you really want to make sure that you go to the scholarly resources, and that's why we emphasize going through ODU's databases to get information. Even though I've been away from my classroom experiences of ODU for many years, when I need to research anything for the organizations I belong to write a paper, I always go back to the ODU database because I'm so familiar with using it, and I know there's a lot of information there. So the ODU library, here's the URL, and you go to the library. It's very easy to get around on, has a wealth of information. They also have a library guide in there for writing a review of literature. If you click on this link, it will take you to that library guide and give you some helpful tips. Just remember, if you're not physically located at the ODU campus, there are a lot of services that they have to help students. Even if you need a book, you can request that a book will be sent to you, and they send it directly to you, and then you just return it when you're finished. So it's a wonderful way to get information if you need it. They also belong to interlibrary loan, so if you want something that ODU does not have, but say it's at Virginia Tech or it's at George Mason, they can get it from one of those entities and send it to you. Most stuff nowadays, other than books, they can do electronically, so you get it within like a 24, 48-hour turnaround. So it's really great. So let's just talk about a review of literature and why we want to do what we do. So why do you conduct a review of literature? What is the purpose for doing that? You conduct a review of literature so that you can see what's already been written about your topic, and so that you can also add more to the scholarly field in which you are a part of. And it helps you find out important things that are related to your particular problem. So if you recall at the beginning of this lesson, we talked about that. How should you organize your review of literature? Your review of literature should correlate with your research hypotheses or your objectives or questions. And so you can organize it around those particular variables or those particular entities that you have in your questions. How do you conduct a review of literature? We talked about that. You want to make sure that you go to primary sources and that you review both sides of every variable that you are investigating. And then we talked about the major sources of information for the review. It's really kind of unlimited, but since this is a scholarly paper and this is supposed to add to the knowledge base in your field, you want to make sure that you tend to use scholarly resources such as books, journals, databases, government documents, and some websites. So just a couple of quick APA tips, because APA seems like an ever-evolving thing that we all have to do, and sometimes it can be fun and sometimes it can make you crazy. When you use the words United States as a noun, when you say I live in the United States, you capitalize it and spell it out. But when you're using U.S. as an adjective, like U.S. Department of Agriculture, U.S. Food and Drug, you put U.S. And then, of course, here comes along Washington, D.C. And D.C., even though it stands for District of Columbia, does not get any periods. It's just one of those quirks of the American English language. The word etc., which is all pushed together, does have a period, even though it comes from two Latin words, et cetera. Et means and. And then there's another one called et al. It's two separate words with a period after the al. And it only has a period there, no period after the T, and it comes from et alius, which means and others. So just some of the funs of APA. So let's quickly go through a little bit to review for the test again so that it's firmly imprinted in your brain. What is research? Remember that research is our systematic attempt to provide an answer to whatever your goal is, your question, your hypothesis. It's a scientific process, or a systematic process, to do that. So what are the steps in the scientific method? In the scientific method, first we want to identify and define the problem. Then we formulate a testable hypothesis, questions, or objectives. We collect, organize, tabulate, and analyze the data. You formulate conclusions on the basis of what you found, and then you appraise new conclusions or make recommendations in light of future needs. What are your criteria for evaluating the selection of a problem or your problems that you have? Remember that we want to make sure that it is operational. So you have those 5 criteria that you want to say, does this problem really have all the variables in it that I need to know to have a successful way to determine if this problem can be examined and researched? Now, what are the titles of the chapters as we do them at ODU? Your book for this class does have slightly different answers for the titles, but for us at ODU, Chapter 1 is the introduction. Chapter 2 is the review of literature, sometimes called the literature review. Chapter 3, methods and procedures. Chapter 4, your findings. And then Chapter 5 has a longer title. It's summary, conclusions, and recommendations. Remember again about operational definitions. Remember that our research problems have to be operational, and that is the who, why, what, where, and how. So how do we classify research studies that we have? We have 3 main classifications that we use here in our field of study. The first one is historical. The second, and that's looking at something's happened in the past and reviewing that. The second is descriptive, which covers surveys, developmental cases, field correlational, and ex post facto, which is after the fact. And then experimental, and they have true experimental, quasi-experimental, and action experimental. Remember the first 2, historical and descriptive, have objectives or questions, and the last one has the hypotheses. So how do we define research goals? They're projections of things that could be an outcome. It's a framework to guide your study. What are the types of goals that we can have? We can have hypotheses, objections, or questions. And then the last is citation techniques. We use APA for our techniques of citing everything in our field of study. So for Chapter 1, what are those little subtitles that go under Chapter 1? It's a rather long list. But you have your introduction, your statement of the problem. What are your goals for research? What's the background and significance? And this is important because they need to know where the problem arose and why it is important to your field of study. What are the limitations? What are the things you know going out the gate with this research that you're not going to be able to change and you can't account for? What are the assumptions that you make? What procedures do you plan to use to gather your research? And then your definition of terms so that people fully understand what you are saying. Then your summary and overview, and this is all part of your introduction or your Chapter 1. Questions should be easy for you to answer since we just went over them. But why do you conduct a review of literature? So you can know what's been done and you can become an expert on the area that you are researching. How do you organize your review of literature? It depends upon how you want to present your information, but usually you organize your review of literature either based on your variables or your describers cited in the problem statement, or you do it on your variables or describers identified in the research goals, your hypotheses. How do you conduct it? We talked a lot about that. You go out and you look for primary sources. You see what other people have done. Major sources for getting the information. There is a rather exhaustive list, but we do want to remember that we mainly go to scholarly articles. We can go to databases, books, journal articles, websites, newspapers, government documents, but we want to have primary sources and we want them to be scholarly. Another good way to get a lot of information that ties in is when you are looking at an article to go to their references at the end, and then you can see where they got some of their information, and you can review that to see if there's more that you can glean from that. A few helpful hints. I know that all of you are in graduate school, so you understand about plagiarism, but it is still kind of a bugaboo, so you have to be very careful. If you are going to paraphrase what someone said, if you want to take a statement or something that was in this class and restate it in your own terms, then you just you include that information as a statement. And at the end of your paraphrase statement, you would put Jones, comma, 2020. There's no quotation marks because you're not directly quoting, you're paraphrasing what was said. But if you do have a direct quote, you have to have quotation marks, the name or names of the authors, the year, and the page or paragraph number is required. So if you lift an exact sentence off a page and put it in your document, you need to put the page or the paragraph number. The paragraph number usually comes into play for things that you get off the internet. Remember, we talked about block quote last lesson. It doesn't have quotation marks, but it does have the information at the end, and it has to be indented 0.5 in the body of the document. So now we're going to jump out a little bit to Microsoft Word and out to the library database so you can get a little more help in how to navigate around on those. Okay, so let's go to the ODU library webpage. And just ODU library webpage. You see it has a wealth of information on the web page. Right here you see the word research. Will take you to that. It also shows you the databases, research guides, books, articles, everything you ever wanted to know. If we go to databases, we can come over here. And I mentioned in the lesson that ERIC is a database that we use. You see right here we have ERIC First Search, ERIC Education Information Center, and you just look at them and see what they say that they have. They all are pretty much the same. This one's restricted to ODU, and this one is unrestricted. So if I choose the first one, I could put in here that I want to know about technology in education. That's my first field. And I could come over here, and this is what's called a Boolean operator, and I say, but not about computers. I want to know about technology, but I don't want to know about technology as it relates to computers. You can change the fields over here. If you know a particular person wrote an article, say Jones wrote an article or Moy wrote an article, you could change the field to author and type the author's last name to find it. So I'm going to click search. And so I see these reports, that these databases that came up. These are like abstracts to tell you what's going, what came up based on your search. Teachers' perception and factors and limited use of assistive technology. So I'm getting still a lot of technology. Here's the thing. A study of teachers' view to improve phys ed. So I might want to go back and clean this up a little bit because I don't see where it's giving me what I really wanted. Let me just try technology education instead of technology in education. Maybe that would clear it up a little bit. The effects of blended learning. Now it's a little closer to what I was really looking for. So if I look at this one, this is the abstract, and it will tell me what, it's from an academic journal, so I know where it comes, the source. It tells me the author's names. This is from the International Journal of Research and Education. I see the year of it, the date, so it fits in the date criteria. I can read this to see, and they say right here, here's their research statement. The purpose of this research study was to determine the effects of traditional science instruction and blended learning on STEM achievement of elementary school students from low socioeconomic areas. Okay, so that sounds like that might be something that goes along with what I want to do. I click right here if I want to look at the full text. It takes me to another page. There's also a place in here where you can save these in the library in your own like little folder, but I usually just downloaded them so I didn't have to go back to the library to find them. You can see right here that this is peer reviewed, which adds to the validity of it. You can download the full text and have it as a PDF. So we go down the page and we look at this. So if I come over here to download the full text, it takes me to yet another page. And I have this, and you see that the nice thing about this full text has how to cite this article right here based on APA. So that makes my life so much simpler, because once I download this PDF, I can just copy this and paste it into wherever I need it, and I don't have to worry about retyping it. So you just download this and you just put it in your repository of where you want to keep articles. So that's kind of a neat thing about of using this here to get what you want. You can keep going through the list, and like I said, you can save them in your I think it's like a little archive here in the library, but I always just downloaded mine. So that's using the ERIC database, and you can click right here to choose a different database if you want to. I'm going to tell you, there is a huge list of databases that are available. So you can look in many databases at one time if you want to. You can also do an advanced search that gives you a few more criteria. Like I said, we want to make sure that it's current. So if you come over here, you can say, I want it to be at least from 2010 to 2020. Does it need to be peer reviewed? If you would prefer it be peer reviewed, then you can do that. Do you only want to know about books, or do you want to know different things? So it has a lot of different things that you can sort it by and filter it by, so that you can make sure that you don't get thousands of search returns. I can't talk today. There's your folder. That's where I could save it, is in my folder. So that's the neat thing about looking it up on the database at the ODU library. So say we found all the articles that we want, and now we've got them downloaded and we are ready to start working on them. So we can just get out of here. Well, let me just show you where the library guide is that I put in the PowerPoint for everybody. It's under education, and they have ones for science, mathematics, and psychology. But under education, they have some interesting library guides. They call them LibGuides. They have one on graduate research and education. They have one how to develop a literature review. So they're relatively short, but when you click on them and it takes you to it, it gives you right on the spot help. So You can come over here and click on these and get some helpful tips and find other resources and other things that might be relevant to what you're trying to do when you do your lit review. So that's how you do on the library at ODU. So let's talk about what you do in Microsoft Word. So here's a copy of a chapter 1, and let me get this video camera out of the way. As you can see, it's chapter 1, says introduction. You see going through, you see references in here to different sources. You also see that it's divided into subsections like statement of the problem. So this was a descriptive study, so it had problems and objectives. It did not have, it had research questions. It did not have hypotheses. So I had 4 research questions. We talked about the background and significance, talked about well, I got a lot of background and significance here. Hold on. The limitations of the study, some of the assumptions of the study, and the procedures that we were going to use to do this type of research, and then define the terms so that people would know what you're talking about when you talk about particular things. Like in this case, there was a particular survey called the COIN Career Community, which was an online guidance and curriculum program that the school used to use. So it was something that we had access to the information, but most people would not know what that is when you talk about it. And you go to the very end of this and we get into the lit review and you see a lot of other things. So we go back to chapter 1, and that's the summary and overview. But you see these references are in here as we go out throughout the document. One of the nice things in Word, since about at least 2005, I think, is this references tab. And if you click on that and you come over here and you choose the style that we want, and it's APA 6th edition, you can insert a new citation, or if you click on citations, it will actually list all the citations that I currently have in this document. So you can see the ones that I've used in the past. If I were writing a brand new sentence, if I were going to come over here and write a brand new sentence in this document, and I wanted to say, you know, something about career exploration is very important to middle school students, and I wanted to say that that came from what I had, that Choi had done an article on. I could just click this right here and it would automatically pop it in there for me. Sometimes it does put that little extra parenthesis in there, or sometimes I type it because I type faster than my brain thinks. If I needed to change any of this, I can go edit the citation, I can convert it to static text, or I can do different things to it. But I have just inserted that from a list of resources that I have used throughout this document and other documents on this computer. If I wanted to insert a whole brand new one, I come over here and I choose the type of source. And sometimes this can be a little tricky because you think, okay, well, I got this off the internet, so that's a website. And then you start filling it out and it doesn't have all the stuff you think. So you go back and you go, oh, maybe it's a document from a website. If you don't see all the fields you want, let me just go back to a journal article in a journal. If you don't see all the fields you want, you can click right here to show them all. And you start typing whoever the author is. And if you need to add more than one author, you put their name here. And I just put their first initial. So now we have 2 authors for this, and the title would be middle school students, I guess. And we'll go put this in technology education teacher. And this is published by ITEA, and they're in Reston. And the year would be 2020, and the month that this was published was January, and the day was the 5th And then you put the journal and volume and the pages. So if this is, let me think, I'll just make up a volume. This is volume 30. This is issue 1 because it's the first one for the year, and it's on pages 78 through 95. So once I do that, I can just click OK. And now I have added that into my list of available citations. If I come over here and look, it should be over here lurking around somewhere right there, Jones and Moy, as a citation that I can use. So these are very handy to have, and it's a good way if you're going to use a lot of references. It's my preferred way to keep them straight. Now, it doesn't always work 100% accurately. Sometimes what Microsoft Word says is the right way to do it is not what APA says. So sometimes there's little glitches, but for the most part, it's pretty accurate, and it's really great for keeping everything straight. Because the really excellent part of it is when you get to the very end, this has got more than chapter 1 in it. This has got my lit review in it too, so it's got a lot more, some appendices. But when you get to the very end, you see the references. These references were put in as a bibliography, and so I did not have to go and retype all of these to put them in here. So I went over here and told Microsoft Word that I wanted to make a bibliography. And it showed the different kinds that you can make. And I want a bibliography, except I don't want it to say bibliography. I want it to say references. And I can just click and it will automatically take everything that I put in as a reference. I can tell it to update citations and bibliography. So if I had typed in that reference of Jones and Moy somewhere in my article, it would now add that into my list of references here in this list of references at the end of my paper. You can always update it by just clicking on it, and it's really nice. So the bibliography part and the table of contents part are very handy tools to have when we have to index and reference a lot of things in this research proposal. So that pretty much concludes what I wanted to go over today. I think we've covered a lot of stuff for today. It went on a little bit long. Sorry about that. But I hope that you got some valuable information out of here. And if you have any questions, just send me an email or give me a call and we'll discuss it. Thank you.